You are listening to Confessions of a Counselor podcast. Here we will talk all things mental health in bite-sized chunks. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Confessions of a Counselor. I'm your host, Janice, and in today's episode, I thought we would talk about a really important topic, something that I talk about with clients all the time, which is boundaries. Okay, let's jump right in. So when we hear boundaries, we often think of this barrier or wall or the way that I want someone else to show up around me. And when we start to get into the nitty-gritty of what boundaries actually are, it's about how I'm going to show up. It's about what I'm going to do. So Brene Brown puts it really eloquently. So she says, boundaries are about respecting ourselves and about respecting our limits. It's about knowing what we need in order to thrive and communicating what that is to others. So we think of boundaries kind of as invisible lines that define where I end and where someone else begins. And this line can move and it can change, and sometimes it can be hard to find what that line is for each person. So we're not talking about keeping people out with our boundaries, but about figuring out who the people are that we want to let in. Who do we want to come into our space? Who are we going to give permission to influence us and to change how we show up? So it's about protecting our emotional space, our time, and our energy. Setting boundaries is more than just saying no, right? It's not about saying you can't do that or I don't like it when you do this. It's about being willing to adjust how I'm showing up when someone crosses a boundary for us. So I often say in session, boundaries aren't about how I want someone else to show up, but it's about how I'm going to show up differently when they choose a behavior. So it's about prioritizing our needs and our values and refusing to constantly sacrifice ourselves or our needs for that other person. So they're going to show up the way that they're going to show up. And how am I going to show up based on that behavior or based on that choice? So it's not always about telling someone that you can't show up this way or I don't like it when you do this. It's about what am I going to do differently if they choose to show up that way. So I know that this is easier said than done, which is something I say in session all the time. Setting boundaries is incredibly challenging. It is hard work and it's nuanced. It's not straightforward. It's not the same for everyone. People often push back when we start to set boundaries. So one of the things that I talk about when we're talking about boundary setting in session is expect pushback. Expect people to not want to follow the boundaries that you're putting in place because they're new. And people liked the way that you showed up before because it benefited them. So we often receive pushback because we're saying, I'm not going to show up that way anymore. I'm going to do something different. People typically don't like that. And it creates healthier relationships in the future. And it allows us to feel more connected and more secure in the relationship. So noticing too the people who push back, right? So if they're trying to make you feel guilty or manipulate you, we might want to be checking in with what type of relationship this is. And is this a healthy relationship for us to continue in? So it adds a layer to it when we're setting boundaries and we're recognizing who is accepting of these boundaries and who is pushing back and how is that influencing how we're showing up together. What I want you to take away is to remember that the temporary discomfort of that pushback, of the change in relationship dynamics, of the shift that happens is far less burdensome than if we continue to be in that relationship and constantly have our boundaries crossed, constantly be emotionally depleted, constantly changing and showing up differently for that other person without reciprocation. So the long-term toll of having our boundaries constantly violated is draining and leads to oftentimes burnout. So when we start to set those boundaries, we can start to feel better about ourselves and feel better about our relationships. And that long-term payoff is worth it in the end. Okay, so remember that boundary setting isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling how I show up. It's about choosing how I want to show up and owning the life that I want to live. So it's recognizing that I have the right to say no without explanation. And it's about understanding that my time and my energy is precious and that other people don't have a right to that if they're not going to show up and respect me for who I am. So yes, setting boundaries might cause some initial discomfort. There might even be conflict within our relationships, but the long-term benefits often outweigh take a moment for today to reflect on our own boundaries. How do I want to be treated? How do I want to be spending my time? What's important to me? And what can we do to start to change our own behavior when someone else is crossing our boundaries? And remember that you are important, your boundaries are important, and that I hope you're able to take something away from today and kind of change the way that you're thinking about boundaries and perhaps the way that you're showing up with them. Your boundaries are your voice, and to use them wisely. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Confessions of a Counselor podcast is available anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts on Apple and Android. New episodes are released every Friday. If you enjoyed today's episode, please join the conversation. Leave a review or subscribe to the podcast hosted on Spotify. You can find all these details on janicelyons.com. Until next time, take care.